Hi everyone and welcome to One Autistic Person. This video today is looking at the announcement that was made in Parliament yesterday in relation to the health benefit reform that is taking place. So I was going to do this video yesterday straight afterwards, but I wanted some time to think about it because I had one thought about it and then it slowly started falling into other thoughts. And what I wanted to do was sort of go through this as what I see as like really red flags that are really problematic, but then have a look at what are orange flags, things that could be problematic, and green flags. And I originally had the green flags as these aren't problematic, but actually on reflection they're kind of fall within the orange flag situation, I suppose, because I think there's a much bigger picture to be looked at, and the sort of the language and the rhetoric that was used as part of that process and part of the of what Liz Kendall said, it made it very clear that this was a cost-cutting measure right from the beginning, which we already knew anyway. But it was kind of like you could see that there were plasters being put over. They were sort of trying to cover up certain situations that were clearly just made in relation to cost cutting and making it look like it wasn't cost cutting. So what I'm going to say is that all of these, so both in the orange flag section and in the green flag section, come with a huge sort of addendum that this needs to be done in a certain way, and I will touch on what I mean about that later. But overarchingly, I'm more concerned than I thought I was as it was happening, and I'll get into why I think that was at the end of the video. So I'm first of all going to have a look at what I see as red flags, but things that are really problematic. So these are the red flags. So the first point that I'm going to make on the red flag situation is more regular assessments. Now, again, this doesn't look like it is problematic until you actually think about the current situation. And you have to have been in the current situation or understand the current situation to know how silly this sounds. So it certainly can't happen currently how it is. And how often the assessments are anyway. So if it's less than 2 years, which is generally the average amount of time that people are awarded, between 2 and 3, but it's usually 2. But it can be anything as low as 9 months, and it can be anything up to an indefinite with a light touch assessment every 10 years just to make sure that nothing's changed, and basically to look whether maybe it could be increased if it needs to be increased, or has anything changed, but it's unlikely that is going to be the case. So with that in mind, it can take sort of 6 to 9 months just to go through a claim process. So if you're going to reduce it from 2 years down to, let's say, 12 every 12 months, if it takes 9 months for you to go through the assessment process, and that includes the review process, it can take 6 to 9 months to go through that process. You're constantly going to be going through the process of assessment, which just seems ridiculous, both from a time perspective in relation to the people doing the assessments, but also from the perspective of the person who's having to have those assessments. They aren't nice assessments. They are very intrusive. They're not. It's not like it's just like the light touch situation. You know, you're talking a few hours potentially on the phone, talking through conditions that are extremely traumatic for people, and that's not inducive to helping at all, which is what they've made it sound like they're doing. The cost cutting is secondary, which is absolute BS. But if you go through, you can take them to tribunal if you don't agree with the assessment. You have to go through the mandatory reconsideration process, which can take six months in itself. So you're talking 6 months for the review process, 6 months to take it to tribunal. Well, that's 12 months. You'd be back at an assessment process again. So it can take up, and if it goes to, no, sorry, that's mandatory reconsideration. If you include tribunal into that situation, it can take over a year to a year and a half, and some are even taking up to 2 years to get to tribunal at this point. So it just doesn't make sense with the way the system currently is. So they would have to completely change that system, and I don't think that's what was said. It doesn't seem to be that they were saying the assessment process would completely change. So I'm confused, and they can't take out the ability to take it to tribunal because it is a decision made, and the courts have to have oversight over that if somebody is being discriminated against, or that something hasn't been taken seriously in a way that it should be taken seriously. There needs to be checks and measures in place. So if they're going to take the tribunal process out of the equation, then again, that is going to lead to a lot of people not being able to access the benefits, bearing in mind 80% of tribunal cases are upheld at tribunal. So clearly something's going wrong there. The second one, this one didn't look like it was really problematic when I first thought about it, and then I realised that it included standard rate, which is 4 points, having to gain 4 points on one of the descriptors in relation to the daily in relation to daily activities, daily tasks, which include things like cooking, feeding yourself, clothing yourself, washing yourself, using the toilet. So quite concerning things if they are problematic for you. And it also includes things like communication, going out without somebody with you, like I say, communication both written and verbal. So some quite complex things, budgeting and taking your medication. What confuses me with this is they're saying that you could have 4 points on one thing, which would then give you it would give you, let's say, 4 points on one thing and 2 points on another, and that would be the 8 points that you need to get standard daily living, which is about £75 ish. But you could have on all 10 of those descriptors 20 odd points and not be able to get any help at all, no support whatsoever. And I think they're forgetting as well, this isn't just about the money that you get on PIP, it's also the accessibility it opens up to a lot of services that you need to be claiming PIP to be able to access those services in the first place. And that, I think, is something that's really being missed, and that's the stuff that's absolutely invaluable. So are they going to change it so that you would get an award but no payment award, which would allow you to have access to those services that you may need for things like using the toilet or cooking, or that you would still need that support with? But it's also looking at the fact that comorbidity is seen as a negative, and actually when I've read on the government website the sort of information in relation to this, it looks like they're saying that comorbidities are problematic. And it's like, but somebody who has comorbidities, somebody who has a condition that has further conditions that are either related to it or because of it, so they're either caused by it or they correlate with it, that would mean that these people would be less likely to get help. They're actually people who would need more help. So you're actually saying that people who would need more help are going to get less help under this situation. And like I say, I thought this meant only to get higher rate, which is very different. And actually, to get higher rate, you would probably have to get 4 points somewhere anyway. It's unlikely that you're going to get higher rate without getting put 4 points somewhere. But if you're talking about standard rate, which it kind of isn't overly clear, but it looks like that is possibly what it is, that is going to cut a huge amount of people that are going to be able to get the support, and actually people who quite often are really, really going to need it. And that is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. It's barbaric. It's utterly barbaric. And it's sort of like being squeezed in there as it not really being a major point, but it is going to be a big thing in relation to how many people will lose a huge amount of money and a huge amount of support that they get outside of the equation. And it's not positive at all. There's no positive you can take from it, in my view. Another one that is hugely problematic is the arbitrary 22-year-old starting point for to be classed as disabled under the universal credit system. And this is purely a cost-cutting measure. There is no question there that is purely around cost-cutting. You don't suddenly become disabled because of the fact you've turned 22. There is no reason for that 22-year age bracket apart from the fact that it will cut a huge number of people being able to access the income that they need. You don't suddenly become in need of more money at 22 years old. If you're renting a property, your property costs exactly the same amount of money as it would do if you were 22, if you're 18 years old. Food doesn't cost less because of the fact that you're under 22. The services that you need to pay for in relation to disabilities do not get cheaper because of the fact that you are under 22 years old. So there is no reasonable explanation for it. It is absolutely devastatingly disgusting that that's what they've done. I think it completely misunderstands the fact that employment law is ignored by companies. I am going to keep banging on about this whenever I do a video in relation to this. Employment law does not get upheld by companies. It's extremely problematic to go to tribunal if you've worked for a company for under 2 years, regardless of whether it's discrimination or not. It's extremely difficult, and companies systematically bully disabled people. There is no question that most companies do. That if you are seen as problematic, they will do everything they possibly can to push you out of the organisation, especially if your condition is mental health, or is a learning difficulty, or is a neurodevelopmental condition. So this definitely needs to be looked at, and the understanding of law. And just because they're changing, like I say, these laws that they're putting in that looks like they're trying to help, companies are not going to follow this. They're going to find their ways around it. Reasonable adjustments are rarely adhered to. They are rarely if they're more than just a base level, they will not. They will try their best and find ways to not do it. A company will try their best to say that it does not fit in with business needs, because they can say that it doesn't. And even with access to work, which is something that people seem to see as a major problem at the moment, they will say that even with that it's not about money necessarily. It's about the impact it will have on the team and that type of thing, which it may do, but it is hugely problematic and something that is being completely missed and overlooked, or completely purposely ignored by the government. So reasonable adjustments are often they will say yes to it quite often and then not do it, and in busy times say, oh, we can't adhere to it at this point, which is against the law, but prove that they did it. It's very, very difficult to prove that. So when they're saying that these things are going to help people, it's not going to. The same as flexible working. The option to apply for flexible working, it's great that you can have that from day one now, but it doesn't mean that a company has to accept it, and they can use every excuse in the book not to. And the current way companies generally treat disabled people is barbaric. It's barbaric the way that companies treat people who are not disabled. They treat everybody pretty badly. A lot of companies treat people disgustingly, and that's very clear that that's what's happening. It's not just about disabled people. It really isn't. But disabled people are disproportionately treated negatively because they have added reasons why they can be bullied or harassed or treated differently. And then there's a big one here that I think that and it was brought up in Parliament, but was very much swept over. How are companies going to pay for these new positions that they're suddenly going to have? Because apparently there are a load of positions that are available, but actually that's not true. And with the rise in national insurance that came in last year, and the rise in national minimum wage. Sorry, it didn't come in last year. It was coming in this year. I don't know why I said that. It was agreed last year. It's coming in this year. So raising national insurance, which is going to cost most companies thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands, and some companies millions of pounds extra. And national minimum wage, yes, it's great that we have a national minimum wage. I completely agree with it, but we have to understand the fact that when we keep jumping up every year by £1 to what national minimum wage is, it is going to decrease the amount of jobs. It's not going to mean more people are going to be employed. It is going to mean that less people are going to be employed. It's going to mean more people are employed on part-time work rather than full-time work. And it's therefore going to not open up as many job opportunities, and it's going to mean that everything else costs more, which is going to be problematic generally. So the fact that they're not accounting for this at all, and I know they said that they were going to the Office of Budgetary Responsibility was going to look at this, but they're only going to look at it at what the cost-cutting measures are, not the actual general impact. It's not going to look at things like national insurance and national minimum wage being something that's part of the equation. I doubt that's the case. Maybe they will, but it would show hugely problematic things. It definitely would show that. I'm not over exaggerating here. I've worked in organisations where they've gone, right, we're just going to have to cut a whole level of people, and it's never going to be the top management levels of people that are going to go, because they see those as more important, and they're not going to be able to cut as much money at that point. Whereas if they take people out of a middle situation or a lower down situation within the organisational structure, they can take out more people and put just more work on other people, which is also going to mean that job roles are going to extend even more with responsibilities, which is going to put more pressure on people, which is going to mean that people who are disabled are going to find it even more problematic to go into working environments. So nothing in this is beneficial. So let's have a look at orange flags now that I've ranted about this. I feel like I'm going to rant quite a lot in this video, and I apologise for that. But I am so frustrated with this because there are sort of glimmers of things that would be really good. It's just problematic because of how they're going to be put into place. So let's have a look at what I see as orange flags. So my first orange flag would be face-to-face appointments. So I agree that they should be more of an option, and at the moment it has very much moved towards telephone and online, and I think that can be problematic for people who are claiming it. So some people want to have face-to-face appointments and they're not getting them, and that should be an option for them. But a lot of it is a lot of people don't, and a lot of people feel more comfortable doing a phone interview or a video interview, and I think video interviews should be more oftenly available, more available to people, because quite often telephone is the option, or then they will go to face, whereas a video call can be quite easy for people who've got easier for people who have mental health conditions, or neurodevelopmental conditions. Videos can be much easier than telephones, and also easier than doing a face-to-face, but you're still getting that face-to-face interaction. You can see how somebody's interacting with you. So I agree with that being an option. My worry is, and it's a huge if so if they decide that all are going to be face-to-face, or most are going to be face-to-face, and there isn't an option for a reasonable adjustment perspective, from a reasonable adjustment perspective, to do it over the phone or by video, you are then imposing things that could be damaging or traumatic to a person who has a disability. So it has to take those things into consideration. It needs to be an option, and then all options need to be available. And I don't see how that's going to cut costs, because you are going to have physical locations for these to take place, whereas at the moment that isn't necessarily going to be needed because it can be done remotely. My biggest concern with a lot of this is who is going to make these decisions. That someone can work, that someone should be contacted, how regularly they're going to be contacted, and what's going to be discussed. Who is making those decisions, and what is it led by? Is it led by the claimant? Is it wholly led by the claimant, wholly led by the job centre, wholly led by DWP? Or is it a mixture of both and seeing what's best for people? And that's what's really problematic, because one of the other things is if you are on universal credit, that you will have more contact with the job centre, and that doesn't look problematic on the surface, but communication may be traumatic, or too much communication could be traumatic, or that it could not be helpful due to the constant worry. And if someone's not being treated very, very carefully in certain situations, it could be that you're actually making the situation worse, and again making people not want to interact. And the whole point of this is about engagement, apparently. And I don't believe that's what's going to happen. Forcing people to talk to people isn't necessarily the engagement that somebody wants. If there's other ways of communicating, if there's written ways of communicating, if there's more, if you're able to agree to set periods, so there's routines of it, that's great. But just turning around and saying, as they do at the moment, you've got a phone call on Friday and it's Wednesday. A lot of people, especially people like me, that would really stress me out. Whereas if I knew I had a call in 2 weeks on this date, I would be absolutely fine with that, because that could be in my routine, and I'd be happy with it being every 2 weeks. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is what happens at the moment, where they see a slot and they'll go, oh, I'll just chuck that person in, and it's going to be a few days later, and that can be really, really problematic for people, because people like me have to prepare for a phone call. We have to, and I'm not saying preparing about the content necessarily, but actually preparing to have a phone call. It just that in itself, having a phone call is extremely problematic for somebody, but it doesn't mean it's impossible for us, and we will do everything we possibly can to engage. But it's going to look like we don't want to engage if we're forced into doing something that makes it so traumatic for us. So yeah, again, these become red flags very, very quickly, because of the fact that I don't believe it's going to be put in place with the claimant in mind. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at green flags, and I'm very cautious to say that these are green flags, because it's the concept that's good, but we'll get into that at when I have a look at the green flags. So there's a huge question mark at the end of these. It's a massive. This needs to be done well for it to work. But I believe if they did it well, it could be positive and a great thing. So let's have a look at green flags. So my first green flag with a question mark of whether it should really be an orange flag, is all assessments to be recorded as standard. I agree, this needs to happen. As it works at the moment, you need to ring up and tell them once your assessment has been booked that you want the assessment to be recorded, or you can ring up before that. So it doesn't need to be when it's booked. Sorry, it needs to be once it's been passed on to the assessor and they've contacted you. So they need to contact you so that you can then put it into place. So they can say it needs to be recorded. So, but that is really in itself is quite problematic because it's pushed back on quite a bit by the DWP. They kind of tell you that it doesn't really need to be, that you'll have to have a longer wait. So it's not really a good way of doing it, and you really have to push for it quite often. And if you say, I'm also going to record it myself, they'll say, well, there's no reason for us to record it. But actually, it's a good idea for both of you to record it, because then if something does happen with it, you can prove if something's been redacted or changed. And that is another point as well. It needs to be that GDPR is taken into consideration, that it's still claimant-led. If a claimant is not happy with having their very personal information recorded, then and they say no to it, they cannot be forced to do it. That is ridiculous to say that they are. Some of the things that are discussed in PIP assessments are astronomically personal and very, very traumatic, and to think that that might be recorded for some people, it may be really, really triggering, and actually may stop them from applying, but two, they may do it anyway and it may actually make their condition worse. So it has to be looked at in that perspective. If it is, and that's respected, then I agree completely with that being standard, but there needs to be an opt-out option or an ability to be able to redact certain things from it if you don't want it to be the recording kept a bit. So if you say you only want this sort of mentioned, but I'll tell you in depth, but so you understand as my assessor that this is the problem, but I don't want it to be written down, you just tell them that this is really problematic for me, and then having it redacted, that's fine. But there needs to be an option to not have it recorded if somebody is not comfortable doing so. You can't force people into recording personal situations about themselves, because it could stop them from saying things that are really personal, that could be really, really intrinsically important to that claim. One assessment in relation to universal credit and PIP. Now, if done right, this is great. When they say one assessment, it does massively worry me, and it becomes a red flag straight away if it is what I think it might be. But it is a green flag if it isn't done in this way. So if it's one assessment, and that one assessment is assessing the same thing, and that tells you whether you are able to have both of those aspects of the addition, the severe disability side of things with universal credit, and you are able to have PIP, and it's just one assessment without different things being taken into consideration, that's really problematic, because if you don't get one, you're definitely not going to get the other, and that's not right. If there are currently different criteria for those two things, and there are different bars that need to be met, if those bars are kept different, because they should be, there is a difference between needing support and not being able to work, and you can't put the same bar on both of those two things. The bar should be lower for needing support and higher for the fact that you can't work due to your disability. So, and it would be really great to be able to have those two things being assessed, but if they are being assessed, they need to be assessed to two different criteria, and that I don't feel is what's going to happen, and that's why I think it would actually be a red flag, when in fact the concept of this is a green flag. Not having to have a second assessment, not having to go through that process and waiting 3 months and all of that rubbish that you have to do in relation to universal credit. I'm not going to get into the details of what actually needs to be done there. I'll be sat there for hours telling you what that process is like. It is extremely complex. So in my view, it could be really good, but only if those bars are not changed, that there is not the same bar for PIP as there is for the additional element of universal credit, because they are two different decisions. They're two different things, and they should be kept that way. So if it's one assessment, the criteria should be different, but you could do the whole thing in one assessment, and you could be looking at the criteria for both at the same time. So if that's the case, great. If it's not, then really problematic. More help for people who can work, to secure work with no need for a reassessment if they come back into the system. Again, in theory, this is really good if it actually does happen, and this is one where it felt like it probably would actually happen. This means that if you were assessed to, so PIP is a benefit that you can have in relation to whether you're at work or you're not in work. It's not an out of work benefit, so you would continue receiving that benefit when you were working. Whereas if you have a full-time job and you no longer need universal credit, if you go back into the universal credit system, and especially at the moment, if you are getting that enhanced amount on it, you would have to go back through the same assessment process after you came out of that job if it wasn't successful, and then that means being signed off work for 3 months as minimum, but it can take much longer. So you could be going through a whole another 6 to 7 months worth of waiting to find out whether you are assessed to be at that level. This would basically put it that you would go back in under the same expectations that you were in before you went into that employment. So if it isn't successful, this is looking at coming back into the universal credit system where you were when you left it originally, and then if any changes need to be made, then those changes will be made. If that works the way that it sounds like it's going to work, that actually is a very good green flag. Overhaul of DWP staff and ensuring that they are community based. I just don't believe that will happen. I don't think businesses want to work with the job centre. I think the way that the people were treated. I've been in situations where, as a charity, when I've worked for charities, we've worked with the job centre and then we've decided not to because the staff are so rude. They're not very nice to the organisations that they work with. They're not very nice to the people that they send to you to volunteer, and they often send you people who don't really want to be there, and they've just been forced to do so, and being threatened with being sanctioned if they don't. So it's not helpful for anybody in those situations. So they would have to do a lot of work around that. And I don't know whether the damage is already done with most organisations that have worked with job centres in the past. But maybe people will see the fact that this is changing and it could be beneficial if they do change people. Unfortunately, that culture is very much instilled within the job centre staff as it is. And I think that's going to be problematic, which I'll get into in the last section of this video. Better job-specific training for people seeking work. That's great, but what's that going to look like? Is it going to be outsourced? How's that going to be monitored? How's it going to be measured? Is it going to be stuff that people are forced into training into rather than looking at what their skill set could do, what they are capable of doing, what they would be able to do? Is it going to be a much more complex situation? And that kind of leads on to the next bit, which is better relationship building between job coaches and claimants, which is kind of what was alluded to. It wasn't very clear on what that was going to look like, but again, you are going to have to change a huge amount of culture within the job centre to do that. So and that would then lead to being able to understand the person enough to be able to say what training they would need. So it could work. All of those things could be great, but it needs a very basic culture change and the thought process of what people working in the job centre feel that they are there to do, which at the moment is very clearly to bully and sanction people at every given opportunity. I am going to be as blunt as that. They are bullies. Some of them are bullies. I'm not saying all of them, but if they are, they really are. They almost see claimants like they are not human. And then the last one in the green flag section, and again this comes with a huge question mark next to it, is chronic conditions not being reassessed if clearly lifelong and won't change. Again, I'm worried about the wording here because in theory this sounds like a great thing, because if you have a chronic illness, yes, I agree that that's the case, but it's actually the case already with light touch every 10 years. That's not really changing. That was basically what they said that was going to happen. So you can be assessed for life as it is at the moment. But what are you talking about? You're going to reduce the number of people that are there? Autism being a perfect example of this. Autism is a lifelong condition. It isn't going to change as much as people may think that it can. It isn't. We're not going to change. We may learn to mask more, but that is damaging to us. It's traumatic and it's not the right thing for us to be doing. So what would happen in relation to autism? Coping with autism is not it being treated or it going away. So in that situation, what would happen in relation to that? And there's many chronic conditions that would fall under that umbrella. So I don't really understand what's changing there, and I do feel like a lot of people would feel like their condition was not being taken seriously, which they already feel with the process anyway. So I'm going to have a look finally at what my overall thought process is, and to be honest with you, my overall thought process is that the flag is deep orange. It's very much not in the green side of things because there's so many question marks in relation to the green side of things. It's in the orange section, as in like some of this could be really beneficial, but I am concerned and I'm worried, and I also, you know, the cost cutting side of it was very, very clear. It wasn't, the concept would make sense if that's where the starting point was, but it was very clear that cost cutting was at the heart of this, and there was sort of like a plaster of Paris mold put around it of it being about looking after people, because I think Liz Kendall realised that she was going to come off as a monster and it was going to actually break the party in half, and that I think that was going to be problematic. So that's why they've made it look like this. But you could tell in Parliament that a lot of people who were talking on the Labour side were still seeing this as problematic. There wasn't a huge turnout of people in the Commons for it either, yet again, which is a bit disappointing. But yeah, we need to. I think it's a matter of being very cautious about this and remembering that cost cutting was at the heart of where this started. So most of the worry for me is who is going to be assessing this and what is being assessed. Again, like I say, autism is lifelong. It's a lifelong condition. It will not change. But there is a belief that coping strategies, in my view, also known as conversion therapy, will change us. And I don't think that that's going to be a good thing at all. And like I say, I'm talking about this from an autism perspective, but I think this falls across the whole scope, the whole sort of array of different, especially mental health conditions and conditions that are invisible, are going to be very difficult for people to prove, and very difficult for us to be able to get into people's heads that we can't just pull through this and we can't just pull ourselves together. That's not how it works. That's not how being disabled works in relation to mental health conditions and developmental conditions. I think that there would need to be a big push for there to be more disabled assessors, so people who have lived experience, and work coaches, and making sure that there is an array of people with different backgrounds that are able to, and I'm not talking about just giving people jobs because of the fact that they are disabled, by the way. I know people seem to think that's what DEI is all about, but that's not what it is about, and I'm not going to get into that argument again. It's ridiculous. That's not what it is. But it's not just having people with physical disability, so it looks like you are ticking a box in relation to DEI, that you are actually having an array of people so that your whole team can talk to each other in a situation where they're working with somebody and come to the best solution for somebody. I'm not saying that those assessors should necessarily work with disabled people. That would be ridiculous as well, directly, but it's just that so the team is more diverse, that the team within job centres are able to talk to each other about things that could be problematic for people and humanise people a little bit. My biggest concern out of all of this is, have we been bamboozled into seeing those green flags? Have I been bamboozled into seeing any green flags here whatsoever? Because everything that was leaked, because I really don't think it was leaked. Well, I think it was leaked, but I think it was leaked from higher echelons of government than what we would like to think they were. I think they did it on purpose to scare us, to make us look, to be really worried about it, so that when it ended up being better than what we thought it was, that we should just be happy because it wasn't as bad as we thought it may be. And I am concerned that that's what it is. And actually, the more I thought about this, the more that has become kind of obvious that's the way I felt about it as it was being said. And as I was writing things in green flags, I was like, these are green flags, as in the concept's great, but actually, is it really that good? And are they really truly going to do any of these things in the way that's actually beneficial to anybody? So I'm going to end on just a little bit of, I suppose, sarcasm, comedy, not really funny comedy, sarcasm stuff. And that's that the Tory party was taking responsibility in Parliament for these plans. And I think we need to be more worried about that than anything, because if the Tory party are taking responsibility for them, it's probably much worse than we think it is. So as always, if you'd like to pop a comment into the comment section, I'd love to hear your opinions on this. I would love to see whether people have seen more positives out of it. If maybe you're not seeing any positives from what I've seen, or you've seen different positives from it, that would be great. As always, if you could comment, like, share and subscribe, that really helps with the channel. But don't really worry too much about it. And thank you very much. I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks. Bye.